so I'm here to do my end of month reading wrap up for the month of November. Always struggle remembering what month it is. I read quite a few books in the end, but I didn't do a mid-month wrap up because, to be honest, I've been struggling to find time to make videos recently, and equally I filmed 2 videos this month which involved me reviewing the books as I read them, so you got more in-depth reviews of those in those videos, which were of course reading the highest rated books on my TBR, as well as reading 3 books that are apparently similar to The Cruel Prince, and I will link both of those videos down below if you're looking for more in-depth reviews, whereas I will only really briefly mention those books at the end of this video. And I will spend more time reviewing the books which I haven't yet reviewed. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. On that topic, shall I start with The Queen of Nothing, which is book 3 in the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black, which begins with The Cruel Prince. So The Queen of Nothing came out this month. I was very, very lucky to be sent a copy about 3 or 4 days before release, and I had read it before the release date. I just immediately jumped on it as soon as it came in the post. Basically, book 2 ended in such a way that I have needed that 3rd book for quite some time now, almost a year. I didn't read it as soon as it was released, so I didn't have to wait as long as some people. But I needed answers, and when I had my hands on that copy of book 3, I had to read it ASAP. And if you've been reading the series, I'd really love to talk to you about it, because particularly when I first read it, there wasn't a lot of reviews online, because obviously I read it before release date, and it had been embargoed, so not loads of people had read it prior to release, as some books are. And yeah, I was just finding myself desperate to hear what other people thought. Overall though, I really enjoyed this wrap up to the trilogy. I thought it kind of strung all the strings together. It ended in the way I wanted it to end. If you haven't heard of the series, and you might not know that it's a YA fantasy series set predominantly in the world of the Fae, although throughout the books we occasionally end up in the human world, because our protagonist Jude is a human girl who was raised in fairy from I can't remember exactly what age, but she was sort of younger than 10, I think. So when she was a child, her parents were murdered by her older sister's father. So her older sister is her half sibling and also half fae. So for whatever reason, you can read the books to find out, this older sibling's dad comes along, murders the parents, and takes all of the children, including the ones that aren't biologically his, back to Fae and raises them there. And obviously that is a tense beginning to a relationship, but at the same time she has this difficulty in processing her feelings towards this man, because he does then raise her and sort of take on that father figure role. He is of course her older sibling's biological father, and he kind of raises her in a war-like manner, because he is a red cap and his species of fairy are particularly war hungry, and she has to learn to survive in fairy despite being immortal. And throughout the 3 books she's struggling with that sort of internal dilemma, her background, the way she's been brought up, her relationships with people around her, who she should trust, who she shouldn't trust, learning to even trust anybody. And I really enjoy that progression. I felt like kind of book 3 was the culmination of that for Jude. Jude kind of really became herself. I mean, I think we're always changing. I don't think there's like a point where we reach a final version of us, but I think she was really learning to kind of exist as whoever she was by book 3 and form relationships based on trust with people that she cared about, and that was really nice. So for me, that was like the thing that interested me the most about the series, was kind of Jude as a character. And overall I really enjoyed it. It put a smile on my face. There was some tense moments in that book 3 that I was really concerned for how things were going to work out, which is when I started googling for reviews, because honestly I love looking up spoilers if I'm worried about what's going to happen in a book, and I couldn't find any spoilers because nobody had written a review from what I could find, and I just had to go with it and find out for myself. But overall it was a really great fun reading experience, and I read it in the space of 24 hours, which I don't do very often. Okay, so next up I'm also going to be reviewing a sequel, although part of me is worried I've reviewed it before. I know I've talked about it in videos before, but I don't think it was in my last reading wrap up, so bear with me if it was. And that is Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. This is book 2 in the Trials of Morgan Crow series. I know that there's definitely going to be at least a third book in this series which comes out next year. I'm not sure how long the series intends on being, although I feel like I could read a lot of books in this series. It's a middle grade fantasy series and it's just wonderful. Like, I think if you're the kind of adult who's dubious about reading children's literature as a grown-up, but still kind of miss that feeling you got maybe from things like Harry Potter and other children's fantasy books like I did as a kid, then give this a shot, because as a series I think it has something for all ages. It's such a well constructed magical world, so much going on, so many mysteries and questions and interesting characters, and it manages to perfectly balance, I found in this second book, kind of darkness and levity. So what I love about middle grade is that often it can be quite light. It offers me a little bit of sort of cheer that I can kind of rely on coming from it, but equally there was some dark stuff going on in this book, like some dark stuff, and I am now just realising why I think I've reviewed this, and that's because it was in my reading the highest rated books on my TBR. So okay, I didn't save them for the end, I forgot. What can I say? Overall though, like I mentioned in that video, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was just as good as book one. It totally wrapped me back up in the world and made me so excited for book 3 to see what's going to happen next, and that's all I'm going to say, because I said I wouldn't spend so much time on the books that I'd reviewed elsewhere to save space for other books. So then we have a non-fiction book, which is Virgin Envy. Now the subtitle of this is The Cultural Insignificance of the Hymen. Now this was the Feminist Orchestra book club read for this past period. We do it in sort of bi-monthly. And this book was not exactly what I expected it to be. Overall I enjoyed it, I had a positive reading experience, but I was expecting it to be a little bit more commercial non-fiction, shall we say, when it turned out to be more of like an academic essay collection. Maybe I should have guessed that, because it is an anthology essay collection with different authors contributing on different topics, but when you get that kind of anthology academic essay collection, it's more reminiscent of the kind of stuff I read in university, or you might read if you're sort of interested in a very specific subject, maybe writing an essay on it, and you read a lot of articles that are tied together by this theme of, in this case, virginity, but aren't necessarily combining their knowledge or working together as a whole. They have been written independently, and they also don't necessarily cover every nook and cranny of the topic because they're dealing with very specific subjects. And what this book very much was different scholars or different people with interest in this subject matter analysing media, so whether it be TV, film, literature, that dealt with virginity and kind of how that media reflected cultural attitudes towards virginity and what is said about virginity, which is something I am very interested in, because virginity is very, very much a construction. It is like a societal, cultural construction that places value often on women based on their sexual history, and it is often very heteronormative. It is not a very positive thing. In fact, it's been something that's used to kind of put people in their place and create hierarchies throughout the centuries. And it's something I'd like to read more and more of, and one thing I found from reading this essay collection was that I made a note of quite a few titles that I thought I'd like to check out. So I enjoy an academic essay collection, but at the same time it left me with as many questions as answers. It was more of like a jumping off point. It sparked discussion. I know me and Lauren talked about it a little bit, and perhaps any of you that might have read this book as well have been talking about the subject with people, and it gets you thinking and also considering some media I had read. So because this is dealing with books and literature and TV, I had read and seen some of the stuff they were talking about, and I had not seen and read some of the other stuff they were talking about. In particular, there's a section with 2 essays on vampires, so there's one on the True Blood television series and one on the Twilight book series, and I thought those were so interesting because those are pieces of media I have consumed that are very much kind of part of the public pop culture consciousness of my generation that I've grown up around and experienced at different times in my life, and I loved the analysis of those. I thought it was so fascinating, and it made me hate Twilight even more. What can I say? I never really liked Twilight that much in the first place, but I really don't like it now. And overall interesting, not the definitive book on this topic, but I'm glad I read it because it makes me want to read more on this topic. We then have Asterix and the Chieftain's Daughter. So Asterix is a French comic book series. It's been going for decades, and I've been reading since I was a child. My library used to have all of them available, all of the ones that were out at the time, and I used to take them out and read them over and over and over again. They are set during the time of Julius Caesar in a Gaulish village in Brittany, and this community of Gauls includes Asterix and his best friend Obelix, who are the protagonists of these comic books, and they have managed to resist Roman dominion and Roman rule because they have a magical potion that makes them super strong. And that is the premise of the Asterix comic books. They were definitely one of the pieces of media that really sparked my interest in antiquity as a child. I just adored them, so I continue to read them as they come out. But what I will say, and I know a lot of people who read Asterix will also be aware of this, is that they're not written or illustrated by the same people anymore. So as time has gone on, new writers, new artists have become involved in the process, and they're not as good. What can I say? They don't necessarily have the original charm, but also in a way sometimes things can't go on forever and they can't be picked up by new people because it does affect them, and they have a time and a place, and that's maybe not now. That's not to say I didn't enjoy this, because anytime I read an Asterix, even if it's a new Asterix, it's nostalgic. I immediately pick them up when I see they've come out because I have that existing relationship with this series. But like, this was fine is what I would say. It is not the one that I would say if you've never read Asterix before, go out and check out. I would say go start somewhere near the beginning. If it's interesting to you, they are comedies. They're in that realm of the comic book. They are in the comedic realm. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those situations where I read it because I read the series, but I kind of just read it for nostalgic purposes. It's fun. There was occasional giggles whilst reading it, but it wasn't like rolling on the floor laughter at every page. So moving on, the next book I have to mention is The Castle of Mirrors, which is book 4 in the Children of the Red King series by Jenny Nemo, which begins with Midnight for Charlie Bone. This is a middle grade series that I read as a child and really enjoyed, and have recently been rereading. I've been listening to the audiobooks, and this was the first one that I had to buy. My library had the first 3 on audiobooks. I'd been able to listen to them through my library. They didn't have book 4, so I did treat myself, but I'm quite happy that I did that, and I've also got book 5 waiting for me, so I'm really excited to listen to that. One thing I will note though is that the narrator is different. I don't know if there is a version of book 4 that was narrated by the same person as the first 3 books, or they just changed the narrator, but it was really weird listening to book 4 with a different narrator, mainly because they gave characters accents that hadn't had accents in the first 3 audiobooks. So I think Cook was all of a sudden Irish, and she hadn't been in the previous books, and that really jarred me. However, overall I enjoyed the listening experience. I think so far in my rereading journey, book 3 has been my favourite. Book 4 was good, but book 3 still my favourite at this point. However, what was interesting about reading book 4 from my perspective is it had some major events take place in it that I had been waiting to happen, because I could remember that they had happened. Looking back on reading them as a child, I remembered, oh, we're going to find out something about that character. I can't remember when it happens, but it's going to be a big deal. And it happened in book 4, so that was really interesting, just from a rereading perspective and sort of having quite a hazy memory of them perspective. But equally what I'm looking forward to is that book 5 is the last one I ever read, so there's at least like 6 or 7 of them, but I never finished the series as I got a bit older and wasn't reading as much as they were coming out. So I'm really excited to listen to book 5 and then finally finish the series, continue on and read and listen to the books that I never read, and kind of see what happens to Charlie and his friends, because I care about them and I am invested in his life, even if he is a fictional character. If you haven't heard of this series, it is following Charlie Bone, a young boy who turns out to have a magical gift. He can hear the conversation and thoughts of people in photographs, and because of that he gets sent to Blur's Academy, which is a school for gifted children. Now most of these gifted children are like gifted in music or drama or art, but there are a select few who have magical abilities, and they are known as the Children of the Red King. They are supposedly descended from this mythical, legendary, magical king and his children. So we are following kind of the divide between the descendants of the Red King, those who are kind of on the bad side and those who are on the good side, and the balance of good and evil, and Charlie and his friends getting up to mischief and solving mysteries. So I really enjoy them. Book 4 was fun. My only criticism of why I didn't like it as much as book 3 is that I felt like almost too much was going on. I felt like she was trying to thread too many of the threads together. That's perhaps because of that reveal that I was talking about earlier that I was waiting to happen. But I think that means that a lot has been set up for book 5, and I'm really excited to see where it goes, even if it felt a little bit like jarring and clunky in book 4 itself. Then lastly, for books that I haven't reviewed elsewhere, is The 10th Girl by Seraph Thorns. Now this is an interesting one. I have very mixed feelings about this book, as I think a lot of people do. I had actually really been wanting to read it because the premise sounded fascinating, like something that I would enjoy, and was really pleased when my friend Amanda sent it to me. So I was really excited to it, and I didn't dislike the reading experience because I was completely wrapped up in it. I was absorbed in it and I couldn't put it down. I needed to get to the end. However, that ending, one thing I will say about this is that it gave me 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle vibes, but I prefer 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. But it had that aspect of it being a slightly like paranormal mystery that felt a little bit out of time and out of place, and something was going on in this kind of manor house, and you didn't know what it was. I don't know why I want to look behind me for 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, because it doesn't matter, and I also now remember I've lent it to my friend Jill. But that's an amazing book, would highly recommend that. This I think is going to be more of a hit or miss for people. So the premise is we're following a teacher in Argentina in the 70s, I believe, and her mother was assassinated for being a political activist, and she's sort of hiding herself away because she's maybe being watched by the government because they killed her mother, in case she too is a political activist, and she ends up getting a job as a teacher at this private all-girls school where there's only 10 students. Or is there? There's actually 9, but people keep referring to this 10th girl, and she's obviously asking questions about that. But it's not just about her, it's also narrated every second chapter by this presence, by this man's presence, who seems potentially to be a ghost. At least that's how I kind of read him initially. And he is actually from our time period, but somehow his spirit has ended up in this 1970s all-girls boarding school. And it's not just him, this entire school is full of these other presences, and during the night these other presences feed off of the girls and the other staff members in the school. He feels really uncomfortable with this situation though. He doesn't want to feed off all these people, and he ends up possessing one of them instead, because that's better, and developing a relationship with this young teacher. It's very hard to explain, but it's kind of like a surreal paranormal horror mystery. Now there's a massive plot twist. That's kind of what has people talking about it. There's a huge plot twist. I will say nothing about that, except that for me, it wasn't the plot twist itself that I didn't like. I think the concept could have worked. What for me the plot twist did was sort of undermine the themes of sexual abuse and sexual violence that were continuously brought up in the main narrative. So there's lots of implications that these young girls are potentially being sexually abused. There's some other characters, older characters, that talk about sexual abuse in their past, and potentially a male character who is suspected of being a sexual abuser, and all of these things are kind of referenced to and sort of tied in, and I think the author was trying to make some sort of comment on that and sort of make it a part of her horror world, but actually I felt like the plot twist really undermined all of those experiences and all of those like sort of burgeoning discussions. They never really went anywhere for me, and I prefer, if you're going to include sexual violence in your book, that you properly discuss it and analyse it and examine the effects of it, rather than it just kind of be flung in willy-nilly. And for me, that plot twist undermined it. So that's my main issue with this book. I think people have very different feelings about this book. They have very different reasons for why they like it and why they don't like it. For me, a lot of the ideas were there but just didn't play out. So It was okay. I would maybe read something else by this author in the future, but it's not my new favourite horror book, that's for sure. I then have 4 more books to mention which were in videos earlier in the month, like I mentioned. The other book that I finished that was in books with the highest ratings on my TBR was Night's Watch by Terry Pratchett, which is part of his Discworld series. I like this book. I have never disliked a Terry Pratchett book. I think they all have merit, and this one was like a solid 4-star. Not my new favourite, not one of his slightly less amazing books. I feel like even Terry Pratchett's slightly less amazing books still warm my heart, they still make me giggle, and I still enjoy reading them. Whereas this was just like solid, in the middle, 4 stars, would recommend if you like Terry Pratchett's Discworld. It's not where I would suggest you start with the Discworld, because I think you would benefit from having read about the protagonist prior to reading this book. And the protagonist of this book is Sam Vimes, who is the sort of commander of the Ankh-Morpork Guard, which is the equivalent of the police in the capital city of Terry Pratchett's Discworld, which is like a fantasy science fiction other world. If you're interested in where I do suggest you start with the Discworld, I have a video explaining the kind of whole system to you, so I will link that down below. I like this. I don't know what else to say about it, because like I liked it. I laughed at it. It did what I want when I read a Terry Pratchett book, and I'm happy I read it. And like I said, I did talk about it a little bit more in the other video. I then read 3 books for a video where I specifically read books that Goodreads had recommended as similar to The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, to kind of test whether A, I enjoyed them, and B, I thought they were similar to The Cruel Prince, which is of course a very subjective question. But if you're interested in what my conclusion was, you can watch that video. But overall, I did enjoy all 3 of these books, and they are A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer, which is the first in a YA fantasy series retelling Beauty and the Beast. Although from reading the synopsis of book 2, we kind of explore a new plot avenue. In the sequels, the kind of Beauty and the Beast structure applies very much to the first book, which I find a lot of the time with series that are inspired by Beauty and the Beast. The Beauty and the Beast narrative happens in book 1, and then they kind of go off on their own journey in the sequels. And I really liked this book. I particularly liked that the main character had cerebral palsy. I thought it was wonderful to see that representation in a young adult fantasy protagonist. And overall, I just really enjoyed her, actually. I think she was one of the main reasons I enjoyed the book. I thought she was a really complex, interesting, endearing character to read about, and I really liked her journey. She is from our modern world but gets pulled into this fantasy realm where the Beauty and the Beast narrative is taking place. However, it goes beyond the kind of man and the woman Beauty and the Beast characters locked up in a house together, and in fact they are able to leave the Beast or the Prince's castle and go out and meet his people, and they learn more about them. And our protagonist Harper very much encourages him to sort of get out of his own head and do something for his people, because they are in political danger. And I really liked that, and I will be reading book 2 soon. I then also read Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This again is the first book in a series, and I cannot wait for book 2. This is more of a new adult fantasy romance, love-to-hate relationship between a witch hunter and a witch. It's set in a kind of faux historical period with elements of like French language and culture thrown in there, and equally a world that is very much dominated by a patriarchal church structure that hunts out women who are witches, but sometimes women who are not witches because they are accused of being witches, but the witches are very real as well. So it's a combination of a kind of witch hunt hysteria and real magic, and real magical danger existing. And they basically are tricked into getting married. It's such a contrived setup, okay? But it works. This witch hunter and this witch, obviously the witch can't tell the witch hunter that she's a witch, but slowly they fall in love and learn to accept one another, and I really enjoyed it. I really, like, I was a little bit dubious going into it, but I listened to the audiobook and I could not stop listening. I found the background plot fascinating. I felt like the stakes were real when we came to the dramatic ending, and I need book 2. I need more of the male and the female protagonist and their burgeoning relationship with one another, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. And then lastly, read Seraph Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, which is actually a standalone YA fantasy, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, but I do think that's rare. And I had previously read another book by Margaret Rogerson, Enchantment of Ravens. I think they're actually quite different. I was going to say I preferred Enchantment of Ravens, but I enjoyed them both. I think I gave them both 4 stars. I just think they're kind of quite different books in some respects, but quite similar in other respects. And one of my favourite things that's similar about them is the kind of sense of humour. Like, Margaret Rogerson very much brings her sense of humour into her books, and there's lots of like little witty, sarcastic, comedic comments made by the characters and also just in the narration of the book, and I love them. They add like a real extra punch to the books for me. And in this one we follow a young woman who has been raised in one of the magical libraries. These libraries are used to store grimoires, which are books of sorcery, but because they're so full of magic they have the potential to come to life and destroy things because they would like wreak havoc and they're evil, basically. And she's been raised in one of these libraries. She hopes of sort of like making it to the top tier station of her career eventually, until one of the grimoires escapes, runs havoc, commits some murders, and she gets pulled into a plot to destroy the libraries, or so it seems. And she has to form an alliance with a sorcerer who she does not trust, because she does not trust sorcerers, given her background in caring for these books of sorcery, which have meant she's very much been raised to see sorcerers as like point blank evil, no more complex than that. And she has to kind of overlook that to work with him in order to solve the mystery and save the day. And I enjoyed it. It was good, like fast-paced, fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Margaret Rogerson brings out next. But those are all of the books that I read this month. I feel like this video is going to be very long, but hopefully you have enjoyed it nonetheless. Hopefully you found some books that might interest you, or you'd like to chat about. If you would like to discuss anything, please do leave a comment down below. Love to talk about books with all of you and hear about what you've been reading, what you've been enjoying, what you think I'll enjoy, etc, etc. And until next time, happy reading. I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!